Hello everyone, my name is Boulevard. Welcome to Tournament Tactician, the premier tournament tier list for Legends of Runeterra. Patch 3.19, otherwise known as the World Championship Qualifier patch, is finally upon us, and luckily things haven't shaken up too much for any weary competitive players. See, last meta, even though Seraphine and Vayne were both very dominant, Seraphine was a little bit more of a negligible factor for players. It was the one getting banned more often, and Vayne actually was such a linear strategy across so many decks that the meta really kind of warped around Vayne and beating Vayne and banning the Seraphine deck and then going all in on beating this Vayne deck. And as such, with Seraphine getting nerfed harder than Vayne did, it's just kind of left the meta in this state of, yeah, everything kind of revolves around Vayne. And there's a couple of different levels to it because aggro is still good. Something like discard aggro plus ephemerals plus like Misfortune Swain going to do pretty well. A step past that, we kind of get back into like a more mid-range Demacia style, where we're getting into like Frostbite mid-range, Varus Pantheon, plus, you know, whatever other third, maybe the Leona Diana deck that a lot of players are on right now. And then a step past that, we're getting more into the control players, where Nora Heimerdinger, and by extension Nora Veigar, are starting to make a return. Jace Heimerdinger back in the conversation. Feel the Rush likely to pop up towards the World Championship. But none of the buffs of the last patch were really impactful enough to push any new archetype into sort of the forefront of everybody's mind, so there's no obvious other big deck to come up alongside Vayne. I don't really expect the tier list to look like this next weekend when we actually do get into the World Championship, but I will have a Tournament Tactician out a little bit earlier in the week for any Worlds players that want to get my thoughts on everything. But for now, it does still seem to be Vayne pretty solidly at the top, and then a meta that is warping around Vayne, while everybody kind of fights on the other decks to figure out what your head-to-head is going to be on these third decks. A lot of these lineups are even starting to omit the Vayne and playing a little bit more counter to the counter lineups, and the list sort of goes on and on how far you want to think ahead and try to five-head that. But for the most part, that does leave us in a state of the tier list with Vayne at the top. I have no particular preference on the build, but I think what we're seeing most often in tournaments is going to be the Ionia Zed or the Piltover and Zon, Fiora, and Quinn, followed by, you know, some combination of these. I know Jax just got buffed, so players have been trying that a little bit more. It's been kind of whatever. Everything else, you know, like I said, kind of the same from the previous meta. The Leona decks are popping up a little bit more now, and I think part of that is them doing well into both these aggressive decks as well as sort of the more mid-range Demacia style decks that we expect to pop up. Like, and when I say Demacia style, I don't even necessarily mean Demacia. I think I just mean like board-based mid-range that we sort of expect out of Demacia. Things like Frostbite mid-range and Varus Pantheon kind of falling into that category in my mind. But while a lot of players are on the Shadow Isle Leona Diana, I did want to see if I could sell some people on Leona Aphelios Galio. It's a Demacia version of the deck. It's the one that I've been playing on ladder to a lot of success since the patch dropped, pushed to Masters with it. Pretty... like 40 games played, like a 60-something% win rate. Nothing like crazy, but I went through the stats to see if there was any other, you know, Leona Demacia deck on ladder at all that I could find, and there weren't any, which did surprise me. I know the champions are kind of all over the place, but I did think more people would be on a Leona Demacia deck with some level of, you know, at least like mass stat gathering capabilities, but it's not. So I did want to mention that I think that Demacia Targon is a lot more opened up with both rallies being nerfed, so you're going to see less Poppy Taric, as well as Pantheon receiving nerfs alongside the rally nerfs, where like now Varus Pantheon or like maybe even Akshan Pantheon just seems more appealing than pairing it with the Demacia champion for the time being. So yeah, just a lot of aggro mid-rangey decks. Really, tiers 2 and 3 are separated mostly by power level, in my opinion. Like, I think Nora Heimer is better than Jace Heimer when we're talking about, like, you know, if you're just going to bring one Heimerdinger deck. Plunder, still seeing the relative amount of play rate that it tends to in these more mid-rangey metas, but really it's going to come down to how much Demacia you actually expect at Worlds on whether or not you want to bring Plunder. Red Gwen kind of picking up some percentage points, but players are still, you know, going for the spider route. People are looking at Conservatory again, so, you know, both Elise and Gwen are a little bit spread thin. Seraphine, I'm sure, will come back, and I'm wondering if Akshan Lee can do the same. Akshan Lee cut a lot of nerves, but I think, like, Seraphine is going to turn into a fine champion. I don't think you can just run back the Noxus Ezreal deck that we had. I think you probably need to at least start looking at Ionia more so that you can get the doubled spells to actually level the Seraphine in a timely fashion, because all your spells count as 2. Which is harder now that Ionian Tellstones is not great. But I don't know if Seraphine is going to get figured out by Worlds. I'd say she's definitely not figured out by the opening weekend, at least not en masse. There might be a couple of players out there that feel like they have this locked down. But for the most part, I'm I'm worried that Seraphine is going to come back for Worlds. I don't think she's down and out. And then obviously, like, the big rally decks all took nerfs. Overwhelm was a little bit more praised previously because it was fine into both Seraphine and Vayne. With Seraphine getting knocked down, no one's as interested in Overwhelm as we move on to like more aggressive strategies. Like Annie Jin, I think, is probably one of the best tournament decks right now because it does so well into both Vayne, the decks that play like Vayne. It does pretty well in aggro mirrors. But yeah, nothing too crazy yet. And I'm gonna keep a very close eye on this and try to have a good idea of what the meta looks like next week when I present this for the World Championship competitors. But that is going to do it for me. As far as I know, there are no big tournaments this weekend. Of course, the Aegis Esports League will still be running. I will be casting that this evening. And yeah, that about does it for this. Tune in next week for all of the breakdowns and stuff leading into the first round of Worlds.